Hey there rulers, DMO73 here, and today we have a showdown between Ulga with Daltin and Vier with Paul, finally seeing his favorite mermaid in action. Let's go ahead and jump right in.
This session brought to you by Odyssey Games for pre-orders and sealed product, CCG Prime for tons of singles and supplies, Cardo Doko for international rulers looking for products, and FoulLibrary.com for articles and wonderful deck lists.
As well as our guest lecturer members King Pearlshine, Vite Ramen, Mognite, and Darren Noblock.
Class is in session.
Okay rulers, so before we get into it, just as a reminder, Odyssey Games does have pre-orders up for Crimson Mood Battleground. You can check it out in the description below to make sure to get those pre-orders in for next month. This set is looking like it's going to be an absolute blast, so be sure to get in there. So, Daltin is playing a Magna list, an Ulga list that is using like Prisia box style stuff and including a way to go into like the Pumpkin Witch train by also utilizing Magna's Guardian Beast. The core is kind of similar to what we've seen before. It's also using a little bit of almost like the Falchion, like addition protection kind of stuff that we've seen, or maybe some of the Aristella stuff to just kind of flush out the deck a little bit more and give it some more flexibility. And Paul is playing Vier. We're playing a good old combo with Melody combo. So let's go ahead and see how that goes. I mean, with how many cancels, Daltin will be playing, I'm not sure how many like silences he's playing, but certainly not having to deal with a Child of the Light Moon right out the gate is something that Paul will be able to take advantage of in this matchup. Starting up, we already have that Magog getting to start, and Daltin is also going to reveal a Rogue Spectator at the start of the game. Calling a first turn, we have Wind Moon Fragment, 4C1. Do you see at least one sword in that hand? Bring into Paul's turn. Unfortunately, Paul's second Moonchild isn't super helpful here, particularly because Child of Rain doesn't use the chase. And so that's just kind of something for you to know. Does start with a very strong opener for Paul in terms of Age of Rain. If this gets to stick, it does really provide a lot of benefit to Vier, simply because of the fact that every single chant we cast will have melody or music, and so the melody count can get very, very high very, very quickly. After draw before recovery, we're going to see a Sword of Progression. There's our first one to try to get us into another card, as well as start things off for being able to cancel and bounce and eventually seeing Contract. The Prisia box idea certainly gives the deck a way to be able to push lethal without having to get to Genesis. The big threat, it gives you the closing potential. Something we've seen quite a bit from the Ulga lists. Another 4C, so you spinning Aqua Soul, Loki's Insight. All good cards for Daltin to be able to help buy back that single copy of Sword and kind of continue to reuse it a lot in the opening. Have a Stone of Deepwood from Paul. Curious to see he was also playing the stone from Vingolf 2, or Vingolf 3. I'm not quite sure why he's choosing to play that stone in the deck, but over something like Ataroctia's Amoria. We do see a pass turn, and then we do see our first Prisia's Big Show come down here from Daltin. Going to be having to track Prisia's as well as Sword of Progressions here for this deck. Going into, are we going to see a Spinning Aqua Soul here is the question. He's got the will for it. It can buy him back that Sword of Progression and kind of just have it ready. Oh, no, we're just going to try to go ahead and just use Prisia's Big Show again while we have the moment and get up to 2. Daltin's list is looking to get up to 3, and we do see a Farer's spell. The count is still 2 for Prisia. Keep that in mind. He's still successfully cast Big Show twice. Paul moved the counter back down. But one thing to note is that Prisia just cares about how many times you've cast it, not how many times you've resolved it. So the Prisia's count, just like with Sword of Progression, will go up. even if it gets canceled or interrupted in somehow. Do see a Replicant Scheherazade in the hands, Loki's Insight, Campanella. But Campanella would be really good here, especially since there's that Feasting in hand as well. Yeah, we do see that Campanella come down here. This is going to grab Oblivion Moon. Oblivion Moon will be, Fountain of the Oblivion Moon will be really good here as well, because it'll be able to turn off Rain of Serpents in terms of like being able to use the activate ability that comes from having all those +1/+1 counters on it. So this is a pretty good advantage here. And also now we have access to a Feasting. That being said, again, Melody also doesn't really care about if you resolve the spell or not, just that you've cast it. So Feasting would probably need to be saved for the most important card, being the contract. But at that point in time, he might have the will to be able to pay through it as well. Do we see any other actions from Daltin? Probably not. Looks like Paul and Daltin are kind of arguing exactly over how Oblivion Moon works. Just so you note, it is on enter, and you name a card at resolution of the enter effect, not in as it happens. So just a learning experience there. And we do see just a pass turn at that point in time, which makes a lot of sense. Nothing before recovery. Would love to see something like a setting the stage of Providence come down for Paul if he's going to go for a protection turn. Setting the stage could also be really good if we see that Feasting come down, like in response to the Feasting we setting the stage, so then we get both cards to resolve. So that's a question about how exactly Paul wants to start pushing in through here. We are at 3 stones, so we will be able to contract this turn if he can go off, and we are sitting at a potential 5 will this turn. 3 stones, the coin, plus 1 free with the snake. So we could very easily get, especially with playing things like Loki enters the Game of Gods, as well as, a second Age of Rain is interesting. Maybe just to cycle a little bit. Loki enters the Game of Gods. The spell to be able to Sonic Siren to be able to recover a stone. We could see something to the akin of if Paul is playing Spinning Aqua Soul or Dissonance of Rain. Ultimately, Paul seems like he's just going to pass the turn after that. So we're going to draw some additional cards here for Daltin. And then draw for turn. And there's that Spinning Aqua Soul, like I said, finally coming down to try to grab back the sword. Looks like in response to that, since we're in Dalton's turn, Paul's going to go ahead and use Dissonance of Rain here, probably to say 1-drop non-chance or non-resonators. I think, honestly, I would prefer him to just say 2-drop resonators here, because there's not a lot of pressure that's going to be coming down, and if he does choose to go proactive sword progression here, it's not going to get a lot of value unless he follows it up immediately with something like Scheherazade. And so calling Dissonance of Rain here just says, okay, cool, well, you can't cast Scheherazade during your turn. You'll have to go to my turn, which kind of serves the same purpose, because I don't know why Daltin would just slam a sword if he can't immediately slam like 2 swords. And then, of course, go into Scheherazade. So cutting him off from Scheherazade for the turn might have been the better play there, but who knows. Do we see a Moonshade come down? The question is, under this lock of 1-drop chance, is there anything Daltin even needs to do? As the control deck, it's very comfortable for him to just kind of sit and pass, especially since if he goes into a Sword of Progression next turn, he'll be able to get Sherry on the next turn too. But he does have way too many cards in hand because he drew a bunch of cards with Fountain of the Oblivion Moon. So that's a question too. Swings in with Campanella, who takes 400 because of the boost, because he controls a Water Moon. Percival here being a wonderful add for Ulga, especially if you're playing Generate Replicant, because it helps you really dig. You can dig 5, it can grab you more swords, it can grab you things like Spinning Aquasol, really helps boost the deck's consistency. And with Generate Replicant, you only need to have cast 1 sword, and then suddenly Generate Replicant becomes a Percival if you need it. So there's a lot of kind of tuning to the deck to help boost consistency that we're seeing here from Daltin, picking up that other sword, and then probably discarding a lot of cards to hand size at end of turn. Discarding that Loki's Insight. Looks like Paul's thinking about doing something before recovery, maybe. Down comes that first Sonic Siren, so clearly Paul thinks we're going to try to go in for a line here on his turn. Sonic Siren to try to recover a stone. We're going to see that Sword of Progression to just cancel it and draw a card. But again, that hits Paul for what he needs. It already has been cast, so we're at Melody 1 for the turn, which is helpful. Paul thinking about still if he can try to bait any more resources out of Daltin before recovery, which would make a lot of sense if he feels like he has a hand where he can push in here. Does go God's Art, Child of Rain, and we see a sequence here that's not technically possible. One thing to note with Child of Rain is that God's Art is a will ability. It doesn't have a target, it doesn't use the chase, it just produces will immediately. There is no way to respond to it. So Daltin and Paul actually get into a fight by burning the God's Arts of the Child of the Wind, the Crimson Wind. You don't have to, it's not respondable. It does, however, because of the misunderstanding here, does make Daltin burn his Feathsing just to stop him from being able to produce 1 blue, which, I mean, it's helpful for Paul because he's just going to move into recovery and he'll be at 5 will anyway with a tapped Daltin just having access to Moonshade. So, yeah, that's just something to note is that Child of Rain does not use the chase. You just have the will. Even though it is a God Art ability, so it's an activate ability, I know that makes it think like, oh, it's got it, but it doesn't have a cost. Or it's just activate for 0. Well, it has a cost of 0, but it's a will ability because it doesn't have a target, and all it does is produce will, so it just doesn't use the chase. So now we get Melfi. One of the crazy things here about Melfi is because we have Rain, Age of Rain, suddenly we are at Melody 1. So we're actually technically at this point at Melody 2 because we cast Sonic Siren at the beginning of the turn. But Daltin decided not to grab that Angelic Battle Barrier off of the Percival, so Paul's kind of at a safe place to be able to just kind of go in if he wants. We're at Melody 2, we get to produce extra will. I imagine we see something like Loki's Insight or something else to be able to make use of it. Or Loki enters the Game of Gods to kind of keep the cycle going. Another Sonic Siren coming back down here to essentially convert one of the will into recovering a stone. Hits the same purpose again. We've already cast Sonic Siren once this turn, so it doesn't really add to our count. But we do get to kind of keep things moving. Daltin thinking about exactly how he wants to respond to this, if at all. Maybe looking at the card text of something from the Vier package. Vier is complicated, especially considering the fact of considering when you determine the X values or anything else. It's definitely a deck that can, sequencing is the name of the game for Vier, but you can just off of very little will suddenly have a very, very high melody count and just kill your opponent outright by swinging once with this protected Gleipnir that comes into play. The question becomes, we know that Daltin has another sword in hand at this point, could go to 3. Daltin could bounce his own feasting back to hand. Does decide to let it resolve, so we're going to go ahead and recover a stone. Oh, a little bit of a rewind. Apologies here. A little bit of a sequencing, I guess. We're going to do some things a little bit different. So we're going to do Will for Loki enters the Game of Gods. Got to get after these gentlemen for doing rewinds here, but we are showing some stuff off, which is good. So Loki enters the Game of Gods, produces the will into another will, does it again to keep drawing, has that floating blue. Now we do setting the stage of Providence, which gets us to Melody 4. Kind of everything cancels and cantrips and draws and produces will to go net 0. Dalton's going to see if he can draw into something here. Could try to tuck in to get into an angelic battle barrier here in response. Can also continue to draw deep with Fountain of the Oblivion Moon. That does not look like an angelic battle barrier to me. And neither does that. 2 blue cards, a Lorite and something else. Neither of those are really going to help against the setting the stage. The Lorite is specifically not going to help as soon as the setting the stage resolves. Do we see some action from Daltin? This doesn't feel like the card you try to fight over at this point in time. But I will say, because it's kind of served its purpose either way here. We have Sword of Progression. Now, this is an interesting decision. He's going to cancel sort of the setting the stage, draw a card, and put the Melfi back in Paul's hand. That doesn't feel correct to me. Specifically because he'll just use the one floating wheel from the other Melfi plus a stone to recast the Melfi and kind of keep digging into his deck. Paul cycling the other 2 Loki enters the Game of Gods, having all 4, and then does end up having the Ferris spell to stop the Sword of Progression. So does get to win that sequence, which means setting the stage will resolve. We're up to 5 on the melody count because of the Ferris spell. So we could really go in here. If we have contracts, we could really go in. Using the other blue to cast Melody of Rain. We can bounce 6 cost worth of stuff. Paul does start to kind of target the whole thing. It's not possible. He can't do that. But what we are going to see in response, though, to that is he could target the Feasting, the Magog, and the Fountain of the Oblivion Moon. And in response, what Daltin is going to do is banish Percival, and then in response, that'll trigger Campanella, and so he can banish the Campanella to buy back the Percival, and then let those things that Paul targets go to the bottom. So clearing his board when he didn't really need to, because he couldn't have targeted all of that, but it does set up Daltin for having a much better next turn. The kind of reason to maybe try to do that is to see if maybe there's a way that you can draw into a angelic battle barrier at that point in time with a sealed one-eyed dragon or something, but ultimately just gonna let it all slide. And then down comes Reign of Serpents, who is a 24/24 and can also just help Paul continue the line. So if has a floating blue here thanks to the Reign of Serpents, uses Stone Siren to recover a stone. We're at enough melody now that it would force Daltin to mill. I think they missed this part of the resolution. One thing to note, gentlemen. They told me that I could rag on him as much as I wanted in this commentary. And so don't forget that Sonic Siren at Melody 4 mills your opponent 4 cards. And now we get Dissonance of Rain, can force Paul, not that, Daltin has a lot of stuff, although at this point in time, you definitely should call 2-drop Chance to be able to give Loki enters the Game of Gods Remnant in the grave. Really just seeing if he can hopefully try to draw into Contract at this point, because if he can, it'll be so much damage that Daltin will be in a very bad spot. Even with drawing so many cards, ultimately looks like he did not see contract, and so we're gonna have to just unfortunately pass the turn, which is rough. Daltin's turn. Just gonna go ahead and do God's Art Child of Death to buy something back here. I think that was Campanella, which makes sense. Campanella to try to get into another Fountain of the Oblivion Moon. Being able to stop Rain of Serpents would be really, really helpful for Daltin in general. The amount of value that Paul can generate off of that Rain of Serpents, especially since it's also still just a very large body, is definitely something to be concerned about. Because Daltin's not playing a ton in the form of spot removal as the Ulga deck. It's playing mostly just stop stuff from resolving, so once it resolves, it can be a big pain. Down comes that Campanella, as you saw before. Gonna go get that Fountain of the Oblivion Moon back from the bottom of our deck. Now we do need to respond to the enter effect to produce something, so we should probably draw a card in response to the enter effect. So again, that's just one thing to note, is Fountain of the Oblivion Moon, or anything that's like name a number or name a card, all of that happens at resolution. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if you let your opponent name a card and then try to do something, it's already too late. Daltin quickly swapping some cards for the search to get that Magog back into the sleeve here, because he had it in a different sleeve in the sideboard. Now, honestly, we are at a place where we need Magog here, because if the hand is Magog plus Sword of Genesis, to just be able to contract right now, Daltin kind of runs away with this game. There's not really anything that Paul can do to stop the Magna being able to, or the Ulga Genesis to just be able to recover from every single block. And Paul doesn't really have any additional damage output other than just attacking. Outside of maybe using Lorite or something to stop the recovery trigger. We're going to go ahead and do a sort of progression here to bounce. So we're certainly at 4 casts. Also just draw a card. There's the Scheherazade. Scheherazade's going to get us a Aimul for sure. Then we're going to see, we've got a little bit more will left. Strange decision to go ahead and just tap out to play Illusionary Flower of Sorrows. And giving back the Melfi, you don't have to, which just seems odd to me, because we're just kind of giving Paul some resources to kind of start a Melody train. And he does have 2 Age of Rains now, so like 1 spot removal for addition doesn't stop him. He has to kill both, and I don't think Ulga has anything to stop both. Now, you might be thinking when he tries to go to commit to the Melfi, I'm just going to cancel it or something else like that, but I don't think Daltin has any stones left. Might have 1. It's hard to tell with the nameplate in the way. My apologies. Paul decided to take a chance and go in with the Melfi. Using one of the will from the Melfi, we're at Melody 1 to do Dissonance of Rain, Melody 2, probably to give Loki Enters the Game of Gods Remnants. One thing to note is that he cast the Loki Enters the Game of Gods from before, so it should have gone to the RFG. The other thing is he has 4. Does do Setting the Stage of Providence instead. Now, one of the inherent risks here that I think we're missing from Daltin is that he has the Scheherazade effect, so he could just respond to the Setting the Stage of Providence, or to the Dissonance of Rain, by putting Setting the Stage of Providence back on the bottom of his deck. I think that's just kind of something you kind of absent-mindedly think about, is the fact that Scheherazade is also grave hate in this deck sometimes. Gonna go ahead and cast Melody of Rain to try to put some stuff back. Probably just Fountain of the Oblivion Moon at this point again, although I could see that there being an argument for Imul plus the Flower, but the Oblivion Moon is certainly what he would want to get rid of. Getting rid of the Fountain of the Oblivion Moon. Access to Reign of Serpents. We're going to go into Contract. This will be our 5th. So we will have Flying and Barrier and Drain and all of that nonsense and Swiftness. Drawing 5 cards and putting 2 back. Really restocking the hand at this point. And we finally get to see Gleipnir Chronogear take the stage. And start to do some big work. One of the things that I would recommend we take here is probably the addition, in all honesty, because we can start using our rulers to tap stuff down, which is very, very helpful, and keep it from being able to swing. Again, that can't help us answer the Genesis, but it can help us answer anything that's like a flyer or anything that can provide a threat to Paul. So we are going to see, in response to the enter effect, we're just going to go ahead and tap down Melfi. Melfi will not recover during its next recovery phase. Going to go ahead and play a Reign of Serpents for 5. Keep in mind that with 5, we're now swinging for 27 as Gleipnir. Do we have any more? We can produce some extra will. We do see a Constriction of Rain. Now we're up to 6. So now we're swinging for 31. If we can cast 2 more right now, we're tapped out, so we can't. But if we could have found a way to test 2 more, we could have just done lethal right here. But still, this Gleipnir is going to swing in for 31 damage with Drain. So he's also going to get 31 life. And so that's kind of enough to really put Daltin in the hole, especially since he doesn't have any way to really gain life back outside of the Imul that's now dead, and he cannot just continue to pay into these Moonshades. So Gleipnir is going to swing in, make the swing down to 7 and 67. And then we just pass the turn. Not looking great for Daltin, now hitting a second Moonshade. Does Daltin have a way to answer this here? Especially since anything that he plays that's a Resonator can just get bounced, or it can get tapped down to not be able to block. That's a big piece. I'm honestly thinking that for Paul next turn, we don't even bother calling Stone, just in case, but it does depend a lot on what Daltin is going to put on field. Spinning Aqua Soul is going to go ahead and target the Priscia. Prissia's Big Show, just to get the count up to 3. Doing a little dig in there. Did pay for that, which is very interesting. So down to 5. We're in sealed one-eye dragon range. Casting a... We liked the card that we saw, so we're just going to draw off of Kilo, a Fossil Girl in the City. It's interestingly enough. Gonna play a Magog. We found the Magog. We could definitely go into a sort of progress here and feel pretty safe. Definitely something to keep in mind. That might be worth it, especially since it would also recover 3 stones and give Daltin some more room to work. The question is, does he have another sort of progress in hand at this point? Biggest piece here would be, see, Paul's at 5 stones, so he went second. So Daltin should be at 6 stones, should have 2 stones left, which would leave him at 4 stones if he contracts successfully, because he does have some way to interact. So it'd be a pretty safe contract at this point. Seems like he's debating which line he wants to go to. The biggest hurdle here for Daltin is the fact that Paul's life is 77. Like, that's the biggest thing here. Is like, how much is your most explosive play line as Daltin to be able to overcome this 7,700 strength gap without just dying on the crackback? And he does tap out to go for the Prissia. So this is going to get us Magna's Guardian Beast because we're at 3. Magna's Guardian Beast probably going to grab us Witch of the Fallen Kingdom and Little Maria, I imagine. The problem at that point, though, is because he doesn't have a board, the maximum amount of damage that can be dealt by the Witch Train plus Little Maria plus Magna plus Prissia is... if Daltin has all 3 of his Witch of the Fallen Kingdoms in the sideboard except for the one in the main, then it's 23 and 13, so it's 3,600 damage at max from this pile up. If he doesn't have all of his witches, then it's only 32, which is less than half of Paul's life because of the gain, which is the biggest problem here. Now, he could just crash a bunch of stuff into the Gleipnir, but also we have to figure out the fact that we have the tap down ability to be able to stop the biggest things from being able to swing using Flower. We also have the ability to bounce stuff with Rain of Serpents. Like, overall, this line feels suboptimal in the fact that it's not going to get you what you want, and it's also not going to save you from the crackback. Like, it's an impressive board to spew out of nowhere, but it doesn't kill. And Paul's not really doing much searching anyway, so it's like, I don't know how much I would have gone for this line. This line would have been great to go for next turn after we went for Sword of Progress here, like to just contract, because at that point in time, you just kind of choke Paul out because he doesn't have a way to get through Genesis unless he has Lorites or Kilo spell. Grasses Prissia into the Ruler. And so now we're back to Vier, which is honestly kind of worse because now we have 2 Rulers. Well, no, we'd have to tap down. Well, we're going to lose the Oblivion Moon at this point. Or the Flower. And they'll catch it here in a minute that they have to give the Flower back. Decides to swing in. Get 15 there. Or 12 there. And then just passes? Interesting choice. Does realize he has the moon back on his side, the addition back on his side. So the Rain of Serpent's certainly not going to be able to attack this turn, at least not actually successfully attack. How does Paul close this game out? Well, to start with, we're making some will off of Rain of Serpents to do Setting the Stage of Providence. It's certainly a strong start, although Daltin is tapped out. If we can get to 5, we're at a point where if we can get to 5 on Melody and then go into Contract again, there's really not much that Daltin can do, because especially after this, if this spirit of Setting the Stage resolves, because your cancels are suddenly no good anymore, and then we have the ability to, he has no flyers, so he can just as easily just like steal the flyer, and then Angelic Battle Barrier comes down here for Paul, which we do have the favor spell for before in response to the Melfi. So now we're up to Melody 3. We just need 2 more, and we're going to draw some cards and produce some will. Dissonance of Rain also serves the purpose here because it can give Contract Remnant. And there it is. Dissonance of Rain gives the Contract Remnant. We recast it, and then suddenly we kill you because she will have access to flying and swiftness and all of those other things. You don't have a blocker at that point in time, and Gleipnir will be at minimum a 27/27, and so you will just be murdered. It's just a matter of waiting for Paul to cast it and for Daltin to concede the game. There's the cast. Daltin double checking exactly how big she's going to be and if he has any kind of response. Does not. And so is going to scoop it up with Gleipnir taking the game, and we push into game 2. So moving into game 2, obviously Daltin wants to try to kind of maybe combo off sooner or stop Paul from being able to get that one big drain trigger. That's a one big piece here, is the drain that comes from Gleipnir is surprisingly good. You can get a lot of good value off of it. And so if you, because of just how much damage is being swung through, it's in the air, it has barriers, so it's hard to stop it. And so for Daltin, trying to, a deck that kind of just has like a one-shot kind of kill you idea as well, in terms of the Magna line and everything else, that life gain is pretty debilitating, because now it comes from being, if I can't get Genesis flipped, not only do I have to deal damage to you, but I also have to keep myself protected, because if I go all in, I'll die to the crackback because I won't have any protection and I didn't kill you successfully. So that's the biggest kind of piece to think about here. Just seeing some very classic control versus combo Callstone Pass stuff here. Not very much being taken out. Going into Paul's second turn here, we're going to see a Setting the Stage of Providence pre-recovery to help draw and protect. This is especially true because we want to make sure that we can slam Age of Rain protected if at all possible, because that's going to be a really important card in this matchup. Unfortunately, though, Paul not having any follow-up to that Setting the Stage, which is really not great. Hitting a Moonshade for Daltin. This is this could be a turn based on what Paul does here, where we could see that a Loki's Insight, if he's got one, being like really good. It's very clear that Daltin appears to be maining those, so that could be pretty helpful. Especially, you know, at the end of Paul's turn when Paul's not going to commit to anything. That's a really good time to kind of fight something with Vier, is during the end of Vier's turn. Because, like, even if Vier, like, has a bunch of stuff in response, the only way they can end that is with a Rain of Serpents, which then goes into your turn and is infinitely, you know, something you can mess with. As opposed to if you're trying to fight them during Vier's recovery or during Vier's main phase, they could end that sequence with, okay, cool, now that we've done all that fighting, I'm just going to contract and get some value off of it. You see a draw for turn, paying 200, and we are going to see one of those Loki's Insights comes down here. Paul just saying, yep, go ahead and scoop. I get to keep my contract here. I have 2 contracts in hand. Melfi, Double Dissonance of Rain, Loki Enters the Game of Gods, and Sonic Siren. Taking round of the dissonances and the Melfi makes the most sense here. Still a lot of good draw power in that hand and some good melodies in that hand as well for Paul. I imagine not seeing a Rain of Serpents in the hand probably makes Daltin feel comfortable about trying to throw stuff a little bit more consistently or just more aggressively, just to kind of build a board state, especially also not seeing the card to bounce stuff to the bottom of his deck. So we are going to see that Campanella come down. As expected, it was a really good card last game. It's going to probably be really good this game, getting us that Fountain of the Oblivion Moon. Paul, unfortunately, not really having a way to stop that. So Fountain of the Oblivion coming out here, probably going to call Rain of Serpents once again, and set Daltin up to be able to have more hand advantage than the blue deck, which is kind of nuts. Just passes the turn there. At that point in time, we see a draw for turn. Loki Enters the Game of Gods comes down here. It's going to be allowed to resolve. Now comes the Setting the Stage of Providence. That's allowed to resolve. So we're still going to build up the melody, though. That's the biggest piece here. Still before recovery, going in for a Sonic Siren to try to recover a stone. Dissonance of Rain, still before recovery. Probably at this point in time, again, I think you would call 2 drops. There is a world where you maybe call 1-drop resonators at this point, but also no, there's no point for that because Setting the Stage of Providence resolved. So like the best thing to do here would be to do 2-drop non-resonators, because then you don't have to worry about, like, if we're going to follow in here, we don't have to worry about Angelic Battle Barrier. That being said, like, and I say that only particularly because Angelic hasn't already come down, but Daltin can draw more cards. So that just feels like that's the thing that I would want to grab there to make it so that he can't do anything about it. In comes Summon the Serpent of Rain. And exactly what I said. There's the Angelic Battle Barrier. Would have loved to have seen that be just not an option here, by calling 2-drop non-resonator chance for Dissonance of Rain. We are probably going to steal the Fountain, I would think. In response, though, we are going to draw another card. So, like, stealing Daltin's Fountain here is pretty solid. because we know that we're not going to be able to swing this turn. And so we'll still be able to draw 2 more cards, right? Which is really crazy. Like, we can use Child of Rain to draw a card. We can use Gleipnir to draw a card at the end of Dalton's next turn and just kind of keep things going. Paul's like, yeah, I'm going to draw a card. This is one of the reasons why, again, so here's the thing. Paul still has a bunch of cards in hand. He's got 3 will available. This is one of the reasons why I wish we had called Angelic Battle Barrier in this, like, to hit 2 drop non-resonator things at that point in time, because Dalton let it resolve. That protects us from the silence. That protects us from the cancels. And at that point in time, like, there's a world here where, because we still are going to draw some cards, like, we could have gotten up to 5. Especially since we have the will to be able to cast stuff. Like, it feels like maybe there was something there, which is just really unfortunate that we just didn't get to take advantage of it. So, spinning Aqua Soul to bring back Sword of Progression. Paying 2 to go ahead a main phase Loki's Insight. Let's see this hand for Paul. Paul gonna go ahead and do Sonic. Looks like Sonic Siren in response to try to get it out of his hand. And there's a Melody of Rain, which we can put the Magog back in his hand. This is what I'm saying. If we have one more Melody in this hand of his, like, we could have swung in for so much damage and put Dalton on such a back foot off of this Gleipnir. It would have been absolutely huge from that Dissonance of Rain. If he has another Melody that we didn't see cast next turn, that's what's gonna happen. Oh, and we could have drawn more cards because we have Rain of Serpent, which would have been huge. It would have had at least 4 sets of 24 on it. His only card left in hand is the Contract, which can't get taken. Okay, so we maybe couldn't have gotten there, but we could have at least gone in for a much bigger Rain of Serpents and threatened lethal on the following turn. But we'll see. Because the other thing too to note with all that will is that once we contracted, if we got up to 5, we got up to 4 Rain of Serpents, cast gets us up to then draw another card off of Rain of Serpents, and then use the Contract again to cast and draw another 4 cards. So we'd see 5 cards there, probably see another one, probably go to 5 and swing it. Like, really showing that Vier can just cascade into value if you let it run away. And so unfortunately, not playing the optimum way to protect the silence line was really unfortunate there. Magog coming down here to set up for future Swords of Progression. We do go ahead and see a setting the stage of Providence at the beginning of the turn. Are we going to see a burnout of Memory of Worlds in response to that? Maybe. The risk here is he's paying into a Moonshade. So, like, it's going to cost him life either way. Pops his own Moon. Paul missing a chance to draw another card there. Really unfortunate in terms of sequencing. Does go to draw an extra card and then is like, wait a minute. They catch it almost immediately. Like, how did you draw an extra card? I popped the Moon. And Paul's like, oh yeah, right. I wouldn't have been able to draw it. So again, a little bit of a misstep from Paul. It was like, hey, don't let things resolve quickly. Think before you let everything resolve. You miss out on opportunities. So, let the hazing of Paul continue in this match. So we're just going to swing in the air for 7, I guess. We're not going to go any further beyond that. We don't have any melodies to be able to draw, add up to the count. We do see a swing in with the Rain of Serpents, and Campanella's going to block it. Age of Death, Child of Death coming in with the God's Art here. Is it getting us the Campanella back? Yeah, it is going to give us the Campanella back. It's the only Resonator in the graveyard, so we're going to be recasting that to get a second Fountain of the Oblivion Moon. Are we playing more than one in this deck? That's very curious. Oh, it does decide to grab the Replicant Scheherazade instead of the Campanella. That makes a lot more sense to me. Paying 1, we see that Percival come down, so we're going to start digging a little bit more. Do see a sort of progression. We got to start casting those eventually if we want to get to Genesis. But we don't necessarily have to get to Genesis if Paul can't get another chain for... Oh, we're just going to, continue to cycle. Ooh, in response, we see a Melody of Rain to put the Magog back in his hand so that he can't, so that the sword gets RFG'd. That's pretty spicy. Paying 200. Recasting the Magog. Daltin doing some of the work for Paul. So really all Paul needs is one good storm turn to be able to start swinging in. At this point in time, we'd need 4. We'd need a storm of 4 melodies. And suddenly Gleipnir is swinging for lethal at that point in time. Like just barely, but exact lethal. And Daltin is leaving up Moonshade, so choosing to go in for just the 700 attack here rather than at least trying to push in seems very, very strange to me. Or at least in response to no blocks, try to go in for something just to see what we can find. Reign of Serpent's gonna go in for 4, get blocked, and then use its ability to draw a card. Killing itself because it's a 0/0 base stats. Calling Stone and just passing the turn at that point in time. Truly curious about what has been Paul's hand that we do not feel at least confident to try to push in some extra damage off of Gleipnir. Because we're at a point right now where Daltin is going to start being able to go into the one-shot line, and we haven't gained any life. So that's a big problem. Paying 2, go down to 14. Sort of progression here to just kind of continue to cycle up. Fair Spell. It could truly just be that Paul's hand does not have the right melodies at this point in time. It's a handful of non-melody stuff, and we don't have Age of Rain, so we can't turn any chant into a melody, which is really unfortunate. If we could, I think we'd be in a really good shape. Down comes the Scheherazade, going down to 12. We see Lorite come in to fight the Enter effect. Daltin draws for turn. Uses Child. We already used Child of Death. Sequencing here. Tracking the number of sort of progressions they've cast at this point in time. Flashing in Scheherazade. Well, now we get to Haze Daltin. This Scheherazade is not able to be cast right now. So boo on Paul and Daltin for not maintaining this because we drew for turn. Now we're apparently drawing for turn a second time. We had already drawn for turn, which means we hadn't cast a sort of progression this turn yet. So that Sherry shouldn't have been able to be cast there. And he also drew an extra card. Just, casually, no big deal. Although I will say there's so much will here at this point in time that if he's going to go in for a line, it's probably enough will regardless anyway, with the one Scheherazade. So to talk about the math of it's 13 with the Magna and the Prisia, and then another 6 from Sherry gets us to 11, or gets us to 19. And then we have 22 from the so even with the 1 Sherry, it's enough for lethal here if he goes into a Prisia line, because of if he does play all 4 black, or the other 3 black witches in his sideboard. Otherwise it's like 200 short. Daltin appears to be doing some math. So, you know, in the chat, let's go ahead and get some tears in the chat for the inevitable game loss that Daltin will be given in this match for drawing extra cards. But we're going to play it out here to just kind of let it happen, because I think the lethal line doesn't super matter at this point in time, really, anyway. We're just going to ship that card to the top. We don't have a way to draw it. Oh, no, we have Magog, so we can draw it that way. You can draw into, it looks like a Witch of the Fallen Kingdom. So it does look like we maybe play 2 Witch of the Fallen Kingdoms in the main ward. We do have access to the Rogue Spectator as well, so that's another card that could allow us to just have that last little push of damage for lethal. Go for a Witch of the Fallen Kingdom. Just gonna go ahead and let us go into the whole Pumpkin Winch train here. And so then we just need, I don't know if he's cast any big shows at this point in time. So we do have the Swiftness represented on board. That's 12, 15, 27, 35 with his shouldn't be brought in to play Shahrazad's and stuff. We're just going to start swinging. So what's on board is 35, so even regardless of whatever he grabs with Prisia at this point in time, even just casting Prisia is lethal at this point. Imo comes in, he's just, you know, choosing the sequencing of how he's going to take all this damage. Paul just taking all of it. Saying that is fine. Really just questioning if Daltin has any way to finish the game off at this point, which we know he does because he has the Prisia. Prisia can just get anything at this point in time. I believe Prisia has only been cast a couple of times, but if Prisia has been cast 3, then we grab Magna. Magna grabs him 2 more 1-drops, and we just, you know, fill in from there. So Paul just being like, what are you grabbing off of the Prisia? Grabs another Witch from the deck, which grabs him Pointy Hat Witch from the sideboard and puts another 15 damage on the board, and then that swings in for lethal, and we take it into game 3. Okay, so going into game 3, Paul really hoping to try to see that Age of Rain in the opener as much as possible. There was a really big difference in terms of the pressure Paul was able to put on game 1 versus game 2, not having that Age of Rain in play. Does not look like we have it in the opener here for Paul, so that's a big unfortunate piece. But he is starting the game going second, so he'll see an extra card here and be able to kind of potentially play through some stuff to set it up turn 1, especially with something like setting the Stage of Providence, or even just having the will to be able to pay through a feasting. So paying 1, we got a Wind Boon Fragment for Daltin. Down comes the Magog. Paul being a gentleman and allowing him to get the Magog, even though after calling stone, technically in a tournament, learning lesson there. If you call stone and you have not done that Magog into the field, your opponent does not have to let you. That is deemed a missed advantageous trigger, and your opponent can just choose to say no thank you, which would be a real big backslide for for Ulga for sure. Speaking of, there's that sort of progression that would feel really bad if we didn't have that Magog in play. So we get to draw a card. Nothing like seeing the top 3 cards of your deck, drawing a card, drawing for turn, and then getting to dig one more with Magog. A lot of really good hand selection there. Do see it just pass. Paul as well, just kind of biding the time there. I could imagine we might see Paul starting to put some pressure on here in the early game. Sonic Siren. Just seeing if maybe we can pull something out. Something to help make Random Serpents feel good. Could definitely be something I see played. Sonic Siren is going to get to resolve, recover that stone, and then just move to straight recovery. And get Magic Stone of Deepwood. Rain of Saints just for 1. Rain of Serpents just for having that 1 set of 4 counters on it. Now Daltin goes to go ahead and aggressively slam Sword of Progression to cancel it and say, look, this seems like it's an important card for you, so I want to stop it. We do have a second one, though, so we're getting these on field at least. Clarifying exactly how Rain of Serpents works here. Rain of Serpents doesn't have a trigger to get the counters. It enters with the 4 counters. So if this feasting is somehow being tried to be used in response to the enter effect of Rain of Serpents, it doesn't have one, but it can be used in response to casting the Rain of Serpents to not let it resolve. Paulo does have the Lorite to be able to stop it, although I think in this case I probably would have preferred us to just pay the 1 for the feasting so that it becomes a -1 for Daltin as opposed to a net 0. The Lorite could certainly be used somewhere else, and we were paying 1 will either way for it. Especially since I used Paul's coin. Daltin have spinning Aqua Soul. Looks like a Percival already in hand. Looks like a Perseus Big Show in hand as well. Calling another stone. We did finally find the Age of Rain. This is very, very helpful for Paul because we're at the point now where once that resolves, we can start making any of our chance melody musics, which means Melfi, which means setting the stage, which means Loki's Insight. We can really kind of start cascading. In response to the enter effect, though, we're going to go ahead and try to use the Kilo spell, Hostile Girl in the City, to pop the Age of Rain. So all that work to find it, and it's just going to get popped, which is really unfortunate. Paul says, no, well, then we're going to fight over this. If this is what has to happen, we're going to fight. Does go to do a Loki enters the Game of Gods, which will cycle and get to produce us a will, because the Age of Rain is currently in play. Gonna use Magog to try to dig a little deeper here. Daltin deciding what he wants to ship to the bottom. What matters most? One thing we certainly haven't seen on Daltin's list is any Generate Replicants. That's pretty curious that we just haven't seen that card pop up. Makes me wonder if we just haven't seen them. We'd see a Spinning Aqua Soul, probably going to target this Sword of Progression, drive by back, keeping in mind that he'll be able to cast the Sword of Progression still before the Loki's Insight resolves. Sword of Progression, this is our third one, so we're at the part of being able to bounce stuff at this point in time. So we also could just bounce, but we're gonna go ahead and burn the Rain of Serpents to try to draw a card. We do see a Fairer spell to stop the Sword of Progression, and I believe at this point in time Daltin is tapped out. So that is going to resolve. The Loki enters the Game of Gods is still going to try to resolve and make us some will. And we can try to, cycle into something here before that Age of Rain is destroyed. Unfortunately, we did not see it. So really, really unfortunate. We're going to see a Child of Ruin or Rain produce the extra will here. Daltin not getting into a fight over it because... again, you can't. That's just going to resolve. You're going to get the blue will regardless. See, using that for a Sonic Siren. Go up to Melody 3. So you cast the Fairer spell. And the Loki enters the Game of Gods while we had Child of Rain, so this would be putting us up to Melody 3. Which means we just need one more spell and then Contract, and we're at Melody 4. Or Melody 5. The problem is I think we produced Green Will off of it, so we're just going to go into Contract. We're going to draw 4, put 2 back in Contract. Does hope kind of keep the hand moving. If we find a Melody here, so you do see there's that Constriction of Rain. Like there's a world where if we had produced blue off of the Loki enters the Game of Gods instead of green, we could grab that Constriction of Rain, play the Constriction of Rain, go up to 5. We could steal the Magog, kill the field, kill the do the -10/-10 to the board to kill the Feast Sing. We steal the Magog, we swing in for 5, hitting 2,700, taking Daltin down to 27, go up to 67, and sure it taps us out, but I think just an unfortunate call of what will we produced off of that Loki's enters the Game of Gods. Really just kind of punished that sequencing line there. Maybe thinking about maybe there's an angelic battle barrier or something. I'm not really sure why we used the green off of Loki enters as opposed to just another blue to try to keep things moving. Down comes that Percival. And we see Sword of Progress does get to go into Contract at this point in time, I think. Oh no, he goes to cast Sword of Progress and doesn't have Magog because it was stolen by Gleipnir. That's right. So technically he could put the Magog back in his hand if he wanted to pay 3 because it'd be the third one. He just wouldn't be able to Contract successfully, at least on this one. So it seems like Daltin might be taking that back for the sake of the recording. What else do we have here from Daltin? It's a big question. Seemingly nothing. So we're just going to let Paul go into his turn. Interesting. Now, I mean, I will say that Daltin is certainly kind of ahead at this point in time. He hasn't taken any damage. And, like, we know that Daltin can throw out a huge amount of damage very, very quickly. And Paul has to, at this point in time, Paul has to do a lot of work to be able to try to gain life, which at that point in time we can just kind of sit back and hold it. Taking 7 at a time in the air from the Gleipnir isn't a super huge deal, especially since we'll be sitting on Will during our turn to go, okay, cool, call stone, call, you know, we'll be able to do a lot of stuff during our turn that just kind of protects us. Like Prisia's Big Show here also sets up for future draws to be able to, again, protect the pieces. And we are very much going to be able to go into a Prisia train, the Prisia Magna, Witch of the Fallen Kingdom kind of line pretty quickly here at this point. So Dalton's going to go ahead and end a turn to Child of Death here. We're going to mill 2. And there's that Feathsing. Not going to probably buy that back. However, it is the only Resonator we can grab, so we are going to buy that back. I'm very curious why we went for Child of Death there at that point in time. Do see the Campanella come down. Once again, we're drawing a lot of cards. So this is, again, it's that point where, like, because we missed out on that sequence before, we're kind of in an uphill battle for Paul with Vier. It's going to be hard to be able to walk through. Honestly, Dalton can just kind of call stone pass and just like punish Paul for being able to punish Paul's attempts to get back into a place of being able to make a big swing. Like, you just take the 7s at a time and then you just punish Paul on a crackback, which is really unfortunate for Vier at this point. Dalton wondering if he should maybe go in this turn or not. Doesn't seem like there's a need to. Really just wondering what the thought process is for even taking any kind of actions at this point, rather than just holding up Will to punish Paul trying to set up. Especially with Paul not being, you know, answering that Age of Rain was really, really good. Just not even letting Paul have the time. Oh, choosing what he had to discard for a hand size at end of turn. That makes sense. When you draw a lot of cards off of Moon, sometimes you just run out. You just have too many cards in your hand and you gotta just discard stuff. Maximum hand size is a thing in this game unless we cast Endless Purse or that weird supercalifragilisticexpialidocious flame card. Setting the stage of Providence here, coming down to be able to protect. Like, this is a good opener, right? To like give Paul a turn to try to establish something. The trick is we also just need it to draw cards. We do see a sort of progression come down here, knowing full well that it's not going to let us contract, but we do get to bounce the Magog back to our hand at this point. Then we do see a Constriction of Rain to apply that neg 1000 to the board and at least start. So now Vier Gleipnir is at an 1100. Not a lot of cards in hand. Setting the stage shouldn't resolve. And if you look at Daltin's hand, he's got a full grip. We have, Memory of Worlds in there. Looks like a couple Lorites. It's going to be a rough go. Do you see a Melfi come down to help kind of cycle things through? If we do have a Lorite in, this would be the time to use it. It's a pretty big punish to Lorite a Melfi. Because it's just like you spent 2 will to play a 2/2 that doesn't do anything. He's gonna let it resolve, so we get Loki enters the Game of Gods off of the Melfi. We do see a Age of Rain get to come down here. Now our other spells are going to start to be able to cycle us in. Lorite comes down here on the Age of Rain, which is interestingly enough. I mean, it does. Paul does have a looking at graveyard here. It looks like the Lorite here kind of doesn't make sense to me. Like, I really wish we would have spent it earlier on the Melfi just to kind of really like make that will investment minimal. But because now we're gonna get to start casting cards, right? So we can cast Age of Dissonance of Rain, targeting the Loki's Insight to give it Remnant. We can use the will from the Melfi to then play the Dissonance of Rain. Suddenly we're at 3 melody. We can like start really getting cascading here, potentially, based on kind of if this Loki enters the Game of Gods, it's gonna resolve. And then we are using a Memory of Worlds on the Loki enters the Game of Gods. One thing to note is that Loki enters the Game of Gods, Paul goes to recast it here. That is not how we are actually removing it from the chase. We're using the second mode of Memory of Worlds. It was cast from not being played from a hand, so it is just permanently removed from the game and cannot be recast. So Memory of Worlds is a very good trick there. And then we're just going to, unfortunately, that is kind of going to be the end of the sequence for Paul. Looks like he might have a Reign of Serpents. Swings in here for 19, takes Daltin down to 12. Daltin just says, yeah, that's fine, I'll take it. Goes down to 12. And then Paul's last card in hand is Reign of Serpents, which is going to be a 12/12. Can draw and cancel, or can draw and bounce. Which is not bad. He could have used the sequencing. So the one thing to note here is that like Paul could have played Reign of Serpents first, Could have played Rain of Serpents first, used Rain of Serpents to put Melfi back in hand, recast the Melfi, produce 2 more will, draw more cards, be up to Melody 4. And then like could have maybe even gotten to Melody 5 based on what he drew off the Melfi. The sequencing of Vier is complicated, and at that point in time, Dalton's like, I've got a Witch in hand, and I've got Prisia, so we're just going to Prisia train it out. So you're going to see Paul and Dalton kind of talk through how much exact damage it is. It's more than 4,000 very easily, but that will be the match. A very long one, but finally overdue of getting Vier on the channel, kind of showing exactly the complicated elements of Vier and how Vier operates. Hope you guys enjoyed it. The Vier deck profile will be up later this week, and until next time, this is DMO73 saying class dismissed.